Hey everyone, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a book review for Snow Falling on Cedars by David Guterson. This is an adult historical fiction novel set mostly in the 1940s and 50s in a small fishing town off the coast of Washington state. In 1954, a local fisherman is found suspiciously drowned on his boat, and eventually a Japanese-American man by the name of Kabuo is arrested and tried for his murder. This book follows the trial as well as everything leading up to the trial in essentially the entire town. It follows the victim and his family. It follows the accused murderer, his wife, one of the town reporters, their extended families. Basically every bit of information that would be important leading up is covered in this book. It alternates between the trial scenes and present day and the characters growing up. It starts with them as children, and it follows the concentration camps for the Japanese citizens in America, the men who went off to war to fight, and then what happened to everyone after the war. I gave this book 4 stars. This is, without a doubt, one of the slowest, dreariest books I've ever read, and I loved it. I love that kind of writing style. I love when an author takes their time to really delve into all the details of a situation, because in plot this book is very, very small and limited. The entire plot of the novel is just this death that has occurred and whether or not this Japanese American man killed him. There isn't anything else going on apart from the motivations he may have had to commit the murder and everyone else's relationship with the murder involved. This is largely a book about a small town and the relationships of these people, and at the very forefront, racism. I do want to start off the bat, this is not a book for everyone. I loved it because I love books that are slow and dreary and kind of almost meandering and pointless in nature, because so much of the book, so many of the details don't make sense for the narrative at first. Like, there are so many tangents that he just goes off on that don't really push the plot itself forward, but they create such a full story. Like, you get such a good picture of this whole town, of all these people, of their families, of their pasts and their lives and their hopes and dreams, really. Like, you see all of these people, and I love that. But I do know that, like, for such a slow-paced book and for how bleak it is, like, there is basically no happiness in this book. Everything that happens, it's not a tragedy per se, it's just one of those books that's so full of, like, this kind of normalized despair that no one's even upset over it anymore. It's just dreary and bleak, and that goes right down to the setting, which is just a backdrop of a snowstorm that leaves them all without power. So during this entire trial, everyone in the town is just shivering and cold and miserable. But if you are the kind of person like me who enjoys really slow-paced, really detailed, character-driven books, I think you'll enjoy this. I think it was really lovely. It took me a minute to get into it because of how slow it is, because when books are that slow, you don't just automatically start loving them. But once I was invested, it was just everything unfolded so masterfully. I really love Guterson's writing style and how he crafted all of these details, and everything was just, like, exquisitely done. I don't know the last time I've read a book that really took such care with all its characters, with everything that had happened to them in their entire lives, because you start when they're children, when Kabuo and his wife Hatsui and Ishmael the reporter, who are essentially the 3 main characters of the story, but it's a lot broader than the 3 of them. It starts when they're children, and you get to watch them grow up. You see what their family situations are like. You really see their situations before they're even born, because you're really allowed in to see their parents and, like, what their parents did with their lives and how they came to be born. And then you see them grow up, you see their childhoods, you see everything that went into crafting them as people, so that by the time you get back to the trial, you're like, oh wow, yeah, I fully understand all these motivations. I don't need to be told what's happened because I understand all of these characters. This is not a thriller. This is not intended to be like a mystery whodunit. You find out very early the mystery of the trial and whether or not Kabuo committed the murder and the reasons behind that. But the book isn't really about that. The book is more about the whys of these people's actions, and I think it's so beautifully done. I do think I struggled with some of the details in this book. David Guterson definitely focuses on some things that are entirely unimportant to the story, and in some ways that worked because it really helped with crafting like this full world where you're not seeing just like the limited scope of the plot, you're seeing everything. You're getting this full picture of like the whole town. But in other ways, it was entirely unnecessary and weird, and it left me feeling uncomfortable. I think there are two very easy examples here. The first one, the earliest, and the first one that I really noticed that took me aback. The coroner, who is a character in this book. We get to see from his point of view. You get to see from basically everyone's point of view in this book, so you really get to see everyone. But he's not a very important character in the scheme of things. He comes back a couple times, but not that much. So he's examining the body early on of Karl Heine, the dead fisherman. And as he's examining him, he starts looking at his penis and going, wow, Karl Heine really had a great penis. It's so much longer and thicker than mine. And like, this went on for an entire paragraph. And I was confused by the science of it, if I'm going to be honest. He drowned in very cold waters in the ocean in September off the Pacific Northwest. So I'm not sure what that would do to a man's penis, but I doubt it would be large after that. And the second was just, why do I care about this? Like, why is the coroner thinking these things? And B, like, why do I as the reader care? Like, I am entirely uninterested in the coroner's thoughts on other men's penises or his own penis. Like, whatever. Like, I don't care about anyone's size or anything. Like, it's unrelated to the story. It never comes up again. It's never referenced again. Well, the size of his penis is referenced by his wife later, but unrelated. It's just one of those things that, like, it doesn't need to exist in the book, and I feel like the book would have been better for it, which was it was just odd. It was one of those things that made me uncomfortable. And there were like a number of occasions like that. At one point later on, he really got into a description of the dead man's wife's breasts and like really just like went off about them and how large they were, and like it wasn't like creepy necessarily, like maybe a touch, but like it was just unnecessary and odd and kind of uncomfortable. It didn't have anything to do with the rest of the story. Like, it felt like it wasn't cohesive with the rest of the story and the way it was. It was just, he was so detailed with everything. He was even detailed with like the weird things that didn't matter. But I will give him credit for all like the weird descriptions of boobs that men write in books. He did that, but he treated men's bodies exactly the same way. So at least there was some equality there. Like, I'm not claiming sexism on that one, because he treated men exactly the same way. He described Karl Heine's body in great detail, from his sexual prowess to what a great specimen of manhood he was. It was strange. It was one of those things that I didn't appreciate in the book, and it didn't seem like it contributed to anything. In a way, a lot of the other details contributed to like the whole of the story and the community. I don't know. I struggled with those a fair bit. But back to the positives, I really, really love the setting of this book. It's set in the Pacific Northwest in November, December, in the winter. And the backdrop of this book is a snowstorm. Like, obviously not in the past scenes when you're watching the characters grow up, but during the trial itself, there's a snowstorm happening, and you get to see like the wreckage and like the post-trial moments where the characters are walking down the street, and like their cars break down, they get stuck in the snow, like everyone's power goes out for like, so a good portion of the trial, everyone is shivering and cold and miserable and just having the worst time, like whether it's Kabuo in jail or the reporter staying at his mother's house where they're just huddled under blankets and all the jurors are stuck in this hotel that doesn't have good heat, so they're just freezing all night long. And it just created the bleakest atmosphere in this book. Like, it was so palpable and well done, and I think that really made the trial scenes and the moments like so much more present. You get this feeling of like utter reality from it, because not only are you seeing the trial, but you're seeing like the outside elements of it as well. And it was just like the perfect choice for this book. Like, normally I don't really notice or care about those things so much, but like throughout the present day of this book, you have this snowstorm that like ties the entire present together, and it was just like beautifully done. Like, it was honestly like what made this book to me. It made everything so much more meaningful, which is weird to say because it didn't actually have anything like literal to do with the plot or the murder. It just kind of tied it together, and it fits so well. Like, it was just one of those things that like rarely do I read something in a book that just feels like it works so perfectly, where the book wouldn't be the same without the weather, even though the weather wasn't actually impacting the plot. This book is in large part about racism. The main characters, Hatsui, who's the wife, and Kabuo, who's the man on trial for murder, are Japanese Americans who were born in America in the 30s, I believe, maybe the late 20s. Math is not my strong suit. But they were born in America, so they're American citizens, and they both wound up in internment camps in America. Kabuo briefly because he joined the military and went to fight overseas for America, obviously. But even after the concentration camps, during the trial itself, during the arrest, you can see how the racism and the specifically anti-Japanese sentiment affected everyone and affected the way they looked at Kabuo and affected the way he was treated and the way the trial was held. Like, it was all like very palpable in the book, even though it wasn't explicitly called out at times. And you get to see through all the characters different levels of racism, from the ones who are just explicitly racist, who say they hate the Japanese people, who use slurs, who refuse to do any business with them, to the ones who don't realize that they're racist, who are subtly, kind of unknowingly comparing the Japanese Americans to the enemies they fought in Japan during World War II, and saying things like the face of the enemy. And it was really well done because you do get that spectrum, and you do get like some of the racists are calling out some of the more overt racism in the books, and you get kind of the full spectrum of that. And you also get the perspective of the Japanese Americans. However, I will say, David Guterson, white man, obviously hasn't experienced this for himself, so it's not own voices, but I still do think it was well done. Very hard to read though, because the racism is the forefront. Even when it's not like explicitly discussed in the book, it's always there. It's always like this current running through the book that like the whole thing is driven by racism. And I thought it was really well done, but again, not own voices and not something I've experienced for myself, so take that what you will. I struggled a little bit with the trial scenes just because I did find the trial boring, and I think that comes from so much of the story, like the real meat of the story is in the characters and who they are, and you're getting most of that from the past. Like, this book is like probably 2/3 past, 1/3 present. And because of that, it does feel like the bulk of the story is in the past tense. And you're looking at the past for the true meat of the story and the things that really matter and what you want to learn about these characters. So the trial feels a little bit bland and boring, and it is very basic. They're going over like all the evidence and like the witness statements and I usually like trial scenes. I didn't like this one so much, and I think this ties into my next point of at about the 350 page mark, and my copy's like 450 pages, so 100 pages left. I started feeling like this book was getting kind of overlong, like the ending could have wrapped up a little quicker, and I do think a lot of that is because at that point you stopped going back to the past very much. At that point, the bulk of the book was in the present, and I kind of really felt like I was looking for the past. I was wanting to read more about the past, and the present was very secondary, which I don't think is bad, but I do think the purpose of this book is the present. And I think you kind of lose that at various points, and it was something I struggled with. I do think, however, the very, very ending, like the last few pages, were a little rushed and a little like, let's wrap everything up neatly with a little bow and like, it's over now. But I think the way the story ended, the way the trial ended, was masterfully done. I think it was a great ending that left a lot for discussion and interpretation while giving good closure for all the characters. Like, you really got to see why things happened, and it kind of explained a lot of things while still allowing a lot of characters to remain question marks. If that makes sense, I can't talk explicitly about it for obvious reasons, but I think it was really well done. I think the way everything concluded was the only way this story could have ended. And I think for that reason, it worked very well. I do think the last couple pages, like after like the bulk of the ending, but like the way the novel, like the book actually ended, kind of abrupt, kind of like a little bit cliche and cheesy, but the end of like the overall story, well done. Good closure. Great book. I really enjoyed this. Not one of my favorite books of all time, but definitely one of those books that I could see myself rereading again soon. It was really well written. It was really well told. The characters were so well developed. And this is a book that you read for the community, you know, because this book is great at the characters, but it's even better at their relationships with each other and with where they live. You know, the setting is something that's so important to this book, that's so palpable throughout this book, that you could take this book, set it someplace else, set the story someplace else, and it wouldn't remotely be the same, because you need the sense of community here. You need the location, you need the snowstorm, and without all these elements, the book wouldn't work. And I think it was just wonderfully done. Like, everything tied together so well. It was so fantastic. If you like kind of slow-paced, dreary, character-driven books, setting-driven books, honestly, I would recommend reading this. I would highly recommend it. I think it was fascinating. I think it was one of those books that just drew me in completely. Like, I was so down for this entire experience. I really, really loved it. So if you're the type of person, if you're the type of reader, this sounds good to you, I definitely recommend reading it. It was really well done. It's a really great book. Not for everyone though, but I do think you should pick this up. I think there was a lot in it that made it an incredibly worthwhile, very enjoyable read. Let me know down below if you've read Snow Falling on Cedars and what you thought of it if you have. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.